Begin this morning, though, with the latest on that winter storm making its way across the country.
Millions of Americans are waking up to weather alerts after the storm dumped several inches of snow in the Rocky Mountains yesterday. It's expected to deliver everything from snow and ice across the Great Plains to heavy rain, even tornadoes in some areas in the southeast. This morning, it's the Midwest that's feeling the brunt of the storm, getting hit with strong winds and rain. It's causing significant flooding throughout the region. WMAQ reporter Sandra Torres has more from Chicago, where we're seeing damage caused by the storm.
Well, there was heavy rain overnight in the Chicago area, and it is extremely windy here now as well. Even though the rain has slowed down, there are major flooding issues and also a wall collapse here at the two-story building located near Midway Airport. And as you can see, a part of the wall collapsed onto this adjacent parking lot. Bricks are scattered all over the ground, and where those bricks are, that's where a couple of vehicles were parked. They were significantly damaged, moved just a short time ago. Now, the collapse was reported just after midnight. Authorities have not confirmed this is weather-related, though it is very likely considering the amount of rain that has fallen in this area. The heavy rains have flooded numerous viaducts just blocks from here, and we have reports of several vehicles that were stuck in very deep water as well. Now, the good news here at this wall collapse site, no one was injured. Again, it happened just after midnight, but this is what a lot of people are waking up to here in the Chicago area this morning. Back to you, Savannah and Joe.
Sandra Torres, thank you so much. Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Bill Cairns is with us to tell us about the latest storm updates. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. We've had severe storms overnight through Texas. We're tracking those today into the south. Tornadoes are a big threat today, along with the icy conditions and the travel problems that you get driving in the snow, too. And then the rainfall is going to have its own issues with all the flooding. So the storm right now stretches from North Texas all the way into northern Maine, with everyone in between getting a little bit of something. Notice all the lightning strikes on this map, too. This is a very juicy atmosphere it's working with. In other words, the atmosphere is very warm and it's humid throughout the south. And that's why we're going to get a chance of some severe storms even as we go throughout the morning, afternoon, and even into tonight. The blue on this map and the white shows you where the heavy snow is. It's not a fun drive from Wichita to Kansas City right now. A very difficult morning commute developing in areas of Springfield northwards to central Missouri. That's where the ice is starting. How about these numbers? I mean, just the wind alerts alone with this storm is 111 million people. That's like 1 in every 3 Americans. Winter weather, 43 million. Flood alerts, 38 million. And some unlucky people are under both at the same time. This is the map of greatest concern. If we do get tornadoes later today, most likely they would occur in that orangish color from Memphis to Nashville, Tupelo, just outside of Birmingham, to Greenville, Mississippi, down to Jackson, Mississippi. That's where we could have even an isolated strong tornado later on this afternoon. Everywhere in the yellow, though, you still could get some strong gusty winds and hail with these storms. As far as the rainfall goes, and we're worried about the snowmelt, the rain, and then all that water heads into our rivers, and some of the rivers are frozen with ice. So if we get the ice breaking up, we get ice jams, you get it. It's a mess potentially in the Ohio Valley and western New York. That's where we're under flood watches, and then 1 to 3 inches of rainfall is expected today and tonight. Now, we're also going to see the cold air moving in. So not all of it's going to fall as rain. Some will be freezing rain, and that's from St. Louis to Indianapolis, Columbus up to Cleveland, potentially a 1/4 inch of ice. The rule of thumb is a 1/4 inch of ice, you get some power, some minor power outages. Once you get up to a 1/2 inch, you get major. So I think we're going to avoid that, but it'll be a close call. And as far as the snow goes, the heaviest snow this morning, Wichita to Kansas City. This afternoon, just north of St. Louis up to Decatur. As of now, Chicago, you're on the edge of the heavier snows. We have you right around 2 to 3 inches of snow, but just to your south, you could easily pick up a 1/2 foot, and that does include our friends in areas like Detroit. So you guessed it, guys, today. It's a wild ride out there for everyone's transportation needs across the middle of the country. East Coast, you can feel it's a little unusually warm today, too. And that's that same storm pumping all that warm air into the Northeast.
All right. Wow. Lots going on. Thank you, Bill. We'll check in on that next hour as well.
Too much.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. This morning, there's a potentially worrying new development amid the rising tensions in Eastern Europe. Ukraine and Russian-backed rebels in the east of the country are trading accusations that each side has fired across an existing ceasefire line. That's according to Reuters. There's also more doubt being cast over Russia's claims it has been pulling back some troops from the Ukrainian border. Russia's defense ministry released this video today, which it says shows tanks returning to their home bases after completing exercises. But last night, a senior Biden administration official disputed Moscow's claims, saying, quote, "We now know it was false." In fact, that official said the opposite, that as many as 7,000 troops have been added at the border, some as recently as Wednesday. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in central Ukraine for us this morning, and NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin joins us from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Good morning to both of you. Matt, I want to start with you and these reports I just mentioned where we're seeing alleged exchange of fire in eastern Ukraine. Now, this is an area that has had this existing separatist conflict ongoing. This is separate from the current Russian troop buildup. But what do we know at this stage, and what could this potentially mean?
Yeah, I mean, Savannah, the short answer is not a whole lot. What we do know is that both sides are blaming each other, as you just mentioned. We heard from the Ukrainian army that 3 employees of this kindergarten were injured. It's kind of amazing that no children were hurt, because we understand that there were children around. But again, they said that there were 32 122 millimeter shells that were fired from the separatist enclave. And again, this has been cleaved out of Ukraine for the past 8 years, ever since Russia first invaded back in 2014. So again, these sorts of exchange of fire, they actually happen fairly regularly. They're not new, they're not unique, but they rarely involve civilians. And this one is unique because, of course, and kind of goes without saying, tensions are sky high. And that's one thing that we keep hearing from military analysts and from U.S. intelligence, is that Vladimir Putin and the Russians are waiting to just create a casus belli, a pretext for war. And this is part of their playbook. They did this in Georgia back in 2008 when Russian troops went into that country and cleaved off a part of that country. So what they really want is for some minor incident, some minor skirmish, to create a reaction or foment a reaction from the Ukrainians, and then that would allow them to say, okay, well, we're going to have a reaction ourselves. We're going to go in and defend ourselves or defend the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine. It's just part of the playbook. We've seen it done before, and that's the big concern here. Guys?
Yeah, Aaron, I want to ask you more about this and this potential for using this as this justification for invasion that we're concerned about. While these details are still unclear about exactly what is going on within this separatist area, we have heard these multiple warnings of so-called false flag operations. Tell us about those and how concerned the government in Kyiv is about that, and are there fears on the ground of this potentially escalating things?
Well, speaking to Ukrainian military experts here in Kyiv, and they are extraordinarily concerned about the possibility of an escalation in eastern Ukraine. In fact, they see that as a high probability going forward. So obviously the military here is watching the situation extremely closely. They're also concerned about those so-called false flag operations. U.S. officials also have been very vocal about that. Earlier in the month, the United States actually divulging its intelligence about a potential false flag operation they were alleging was being cooked up by Moscow, involving a graphic video as well as actors' fake blood. Now, no one outside of the United States has seen that video, but false flags remain a concern going forward. Doesn't seem like that was a motive behind today's escalation, given that the kindergarten question was shelled on the government side of the line. But I was speaking to Ukrainian military experts, and they say yes, false flags are a concern. However, the more that we talk about them, the more that they are raised in conversations, the less of a surprise they will be, and the less likely in the eyes of people here in Kyiv that the Kremlin will use that as a tactic.
Matt, now I want to ask you about this other concerning headline. So U.S. officials continuing to dispute these claims by Russia that it's been pulling back some of its forces from the Ukrainian border. So tell us, I mean, they're actually saying that Russia is in fact adding more, right?
Yeah, I mean, there had been some optimism for the last 2 days here in Ukraine, especially from the western side, from Washington, from London. It had looked like this whole situation was kind of deflating a little bit. But now we're starting to see that there was a pinprick into that. And now Western capitals are saying that it looks as though there's no evidence that the Russia is withdrawing troops, as they kind of said that they would or implied that they would. Instead, we're hearing from Washington that there's another 7,000 troops being added on top of the 150,000 that President Joe Biden said were already there. That number itself was kind of surprising, since we at NBC and others hadn't really gone above 130,000 before that. So really, we're seeing more and more troops accumulating, even as Russia is saying that they're withdrawing and releasing these fresh videos showing what they describe as troops withdrawing. But those are hard to verify. The only people who are able to show any evidence are the Russians themselves. So it's hard to really believe them. The best indications that temperatures are cooling around this conflict are just from the words of the Russian officials themselves, who have opened more space for diplomacy and said that they're going to be partially withdrawing troops and returning them to their so-called permanent positions. But beyond that, there isn't much on-the-ground evidence, and that's something that, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It's something we'd have to wait for, and it's something that Western officials say, we can't just believe this now. We have to wait for really firm evidence. And Ukrainian officials are saying that too, guys.
Aaron, let's talk a little bit more about the diplomacy side of this. NATO defense ministers have been meeting today for another round of talks. What's the latest there?
Yeah, that meeting is now underway. It was started with remarks from the NATO Secretary General reiterating what we've heard from U.S. officials as well as Ukrainian officials, that they have seen no signs of a Russian military withdrawal as yet. NATO, of course, is at the center of this current crisis, with Russian President Vladimir Putin demanding that Ukraine not be allowed to be a member of NATO, effectively be ruled out, something that the United States has rejected as a demand, as has Ukraine. We heard from President Zelensky just this morning in an interview with the BBC say that NATO membership is essential to guaranteeing the safety of Ukraine. It is worth noting it is also part of the Ukrainian constitution. So how this square is circled, of course, remains to be seen. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, today saying that Russia is sending its response to the U.S. proposal later today. Guys.
All right, Aaron and Matt, thank you so much.
The battle over masks is growing. More counties and states are lifting their mask mandates, even though the CDC is calling those moves premature. But this morning, the agency is facing pressure to review its own guidance.
We are looking at an overview of much of our guidance, and masking in all settings will be a part of that. We want to give people a break from things like mask wearing when these metrics are better.
Let's bring in senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, Dr. Amish Adalja. Doctor, good to have you with us. So we just heard from CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky there, who said the metrics need to be better. What kind of benchmarks are we looking at here?
I think they really need to change the benchmarks that they're looking at, because when you look at the country, everybody has substantial and high transmission, but and I just worked overnight in the hospital, it's a very different situation. So I think that the CDC needs to change its public health guidance to be more focused on severe disease, ICU capacity, and hospitalization numbers, not the sheer number of cases, because those are going to go up and down. And we've got so many tools to deal with COVID-19. It's not the same thing as it was even several months ago. So I think the calibration has to change over what is going to drive public health guidance, and I think it should be severe disease, not just cases.
Speaking of safety precautions, the Coachella and Stagecoach Festival say they're no longer going to require masks, negative COVID tests, or even proof of vaccination to get in this year. So in your mind, will it be safe to attend because it's largely an outdoor event, or should we be concerned about possible super spreaders?
We know that outdoor transmission is less likely than in indoor situations. And we know that we've got tools like monoclonal antibodies, antivirals, and a significant proportion of the population either vaccinated or with immunity. So I do think that a lot of these events are going to go this way. And it's going to really come down to risk tolerance. If you're somebody that's high risk, that might be something that you might not want to go to, or you may want to make sure that you're wearing a mask and taking those precautions. But for others, it may be less risky. So I think what we're going to see in general is a transition to COVID becoming something about your own personal risk tolerance, taking those personal protective measures that you yourself find useful and other people may not, because we are at a place where we've got a lot of different tools that we did not have in the early days, and that changes how we think about COVID-19. It's becoming more like other respiratory viruses.
Over the last 2 years, we've seen how loneliness, stress, depression from the pandemic are taking a toll on the mental health of so many Americans. Well, now a new study published in the British Medical Journal said COVID itself could also increase the risk of developing mental health problems. What more can you tell us about this study?
So this study was done in the Veterans Affairs medical system, meaning these were veterans who had COVID-19. And what they found was that there was a higher level of anxiety, depression, opioid use disorder in those individuals with COVID-19. And this may have to do with something regarding the neuroinflammation, the inflammation that occurs in your central nervous system in your brain with COVID. It's still an early study, even though it's pretty robust. There's a lot of caveats. We've got to make sure that, first of all, that this is applicable to the general population, because the VA population is very different. It tends to be white males, and that might not necessarily apply to the rest of the population. And there is something called ascertainment bias, that when you're getting admitted for COVID, you're going to get screened for mental health disorders. Are they picking up more just because people are getting more healthcare contact? But I think it's an interesting study, and I think it's something that needs to be replicated in a more heterogeneous population, not just the VA. But I think it really shows that COVID-19 is not something you want to get, and getting vaccinated is a way to prevent any of these complications from occurring. Still so much we're learning about the impacts of COVID. Thank you so much, Dr. Amish Adalja. We appreciate it. And if you, our viewers, have a question for one of our doctors, you can let us know. Email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions, and you can let us know if you want to stay anonymous. Now to more COVID news. Texas is suing the Biden administration and the CDC over the enforcement of its federal transportation mask mandate. And that's just a month before it's set to expire. The lawsuit, filed by Attorney General Ken Paxton and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, challenges the constitutionality of the mandate, with Paxton claiming the policy violates the individual liberties of Texans. The mandate was put into place by the administration back in February of 2021, and it's been extended several times since. This comes as we've seen more and more states start to loosen those mask mandate protocols on their own. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delanian joins us now with the latest on this. Hey, Ken, good morning. So walk us through this lawsuit, what exactly Texas is arguing here, but then also why it's coming nearly a year after the policy went into effect. And as I mentioned right before it's set to expire, though it could be extended again.
Good morning, Savannah. This is a federal lawsuit filed in the Northern District of Texas in Fort Worth by the very conservative Texas Attorney General and a Republican member of Congress. It's funded by a conservative think tank, and it argues that the CDC exceeded its legal authority in imposing this mask mandate, and also argues that there's no evidence that masks actually prevent the spread of COVID, the interstate spread, as the lawsuit put it. And it points out that this is a mask mandate that applies to people who, whether they have COVID or not, whether they're vaccinated or not, and it says that that's improper. As to why it's coming now, we can only speculate. The political climate for masks certainly has changed. People are growing tired of wearing masks. The issue here, though, this is a pretty narrow mandate. It's not a national mask mandate. It's a mandate on transportation conveyances, airplanes, trains, taxis, Ubers, places where people are in close proximity. So the legal standard here is probably different from other kinds of more broad mask mandates. Nonetheless, though, this is going to be something the Biden administration is going to have to fight in court, Savannah.
Now, Ken, you mentioned this, but this is this federal mandate, the key word there being federal, that Texas is going after. And as I mentioned, it's happening as we're seeing these mask mandates lifted across the country at the state level. What's the significance here of Texas choosing to challenge a federal mandate?
Well, for one thing, they could make future law. If this reaches the Supreme Court, it could have implications for federal action in future pandemics. It could sort of outline the limits of federal authority. And it's coming at a time where politically mask mandates are increasingly coming under challenge. In the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, for example, blocked a mask mandate in schools there. So, you know, it's just another sort of legal battle here that could have implications for how the government deals with future pandemics.
And Ken, this actually isn't the first time that the state has sued the Biden administration over COVID protocols. How did those cases turn out? What were they about? And what does it mean potentially for the future of this lawsuit?
Right. Well, Texas was one of the states that sued to block the Biden administration's vaccine mandate on all employers. And as you know, the Supreme Court struck that down in January, giving Texas and other states a victory. That obviously was a much different legal issue, a much more expansive use of federal power there to mandate that all workers get a vaccine as opposed to wearing a mask. But scholars have said the legal issues may be similar in the sense that the Biden administration, for example, never attempted a national mask mandate because they didn't think they had the authority there. The question in this lawsuit will be, do they have the authority to mandate even on airplanes and in taxis and on trains, Savannah?
All right, Ken Delaney, and thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.